the answer. Love is the hope. Love is the only thing that can save us in this world. Love is the key to open up the heart. Love is the place where life really starts. Oh, but love isn't given with a wedding ring. Love isn't given when I sing the sins. Love alone from the soul will spring, unexpected, unreasoned, usually a fleeting, passing thing. Oh, but love, endless love, in a flood that knows no bounds, will gush forth from the soul and will sweep the world around. If the soul is only open like a flower in the spring, and the mind, if it's honest, that wild, heartless thing, and devotion is given with love from our hearts, in an instant we'll be given love, eternal love. Oh, love, eternal love is the answer. Love is the hope. Love is the only thing that can save us in this world. Love is the key that opens up the heart. Love is the place where life really starts. Oh, but love isn't given with a wedding ring. Love isn't given when I sing the sins. Love alone from the soul will spring, unexpected, unreasoned, usually a fleeting, passing thing. Oh, but love, endless love, in a flood that knows no bounds, will gush forth from the soul and will sweep the world around. If the soul is only open like a flower in the spring, and the mind, if it's harnessed, that wild, heartless thing, and devotion, if given with love from our hearts, in an instant we'll be given love, eternal love. Oh, love, eternal love. Oh, love, eternal love. If the soul is only open like a flower in the spring. Most people these days don't even believe in the soul anymore. They go along with the scientific, so-called scientific idea that we're just physical beings, that we have no other reality on any other dimension. And I beg to differ. From the vortex theory that I've developed, it's very clear that there's a high possibility that our world is embedded in a much greater reality, is embedded in a much greater world, the world of the soul, which in turn is embedded in a much greater reality again, which is the world of the spirit. So what I'm doing is I'm using physics to explain these ideas of spirit and soul that people believed in ancient times, in times gone by, almost without exception. Materialism, atheism, these are very new ideas. And they're not especially scientific. You see, it depends on your science. It depends on your fundamental axioms or presumptions about the nature of reality. If you believe in materialism, that the world is formed of these indivisible little blobs, little bits of grit, little bits of material substance, called atoms originally, but now called subatomic particles, then you have no reason to believe in any other reality. But if you believe in Einstein, if you believe in E equals mc squared, and you realize that the whole universe is formed of energy, particles of energy, and energy is no thing, energy is activity. It's just a measure of activity. If you believe that, then you've got some explaining to do. You have to explain this solid, so-called material reality we live in. And I've done that. I've spent 50 years explaining how spin creates the illusion of materiality, how the whirlpool of light, how light spins like a ball of wool to form a perfect little corpuscle, which appears to us as the subatomic particle, but it's not a thing. It's simply a form of activity, a form of energy. And you know, if you don't believe that, stick your head in a hydrogen bomb and push the button. And you'll be atomized, you'll be vaporized. Everything material about you will be transformed into pure energy. So, I mean, I'm not being serious about that, but you can see what I'm getting at. Materialism is out of date. It's dead. It's been dead for over 100 years. Albert Einstein disproved it. A hydrogen bomb, it disproves it. Nuclear physics disproves it. So the whole idea that materialism is scientific is nonsense. And then there's this whole idea of, you know, we just go out like lights, like snuffed out candles when we die. That, again, is just an idea. It's just a theory. It's just a belief, the modern faith, that there's no survival after death. And again, there's a lot of evidence to dispute that. The evidence is in the body of science known as resuscitation, of medical science. There are now millions of records of people having near-death and out-of-body experiences that refute the atheistic and so-called materialistic scientific idea that there's no existence beyond the physical. These people in near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences see themselves above an accident, above an operating table, and they see an image of themselves lying on the table. The doctors doing emergency resuscitation operations, or they see themselves above the wreckage of their body in some motor car accident. And they're confused. How is it that their body is lying down there in a wrecked state, mangled up with the metal, and they are in a body looking at that body. They're in a body looking at that body. Get it? They are in a body looking down on their body. That is a dilemma. I call it the two-body dilemma. Out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences indicate that we do not lose our body when we die. We're still in our body. One of the best examples of this I know is a book by Howard Storm called Descent into Death. You can Google it and get it on Amazon. Howard Storm was a professor of art. He was a confirmed atheist. He didn't believe in life after death. He went along with the snuff it theory. And he was in Paris with a group of students. And over the weekend, he suffered a duodenal ulcer. He was rushed into hospital, but because there was no surgeon on duty in the hospital, this was in Paris, unbelievable. There was a surgeon on duty, but he wasn't immediately available to deal with Howard Storm because the surgeons, it was summertime and the surgeons were at the beach. They weren't equipped for major surgery over the weekend. This was in 1985. And he was in agony for about 5 hours, I think it was. And eventually, and his wife Barbara was sitting at the bedside with him, holding his hand. Suddenly, he found himself floating above his body and then standing beside his body. And he was very confused. He was definitely in a body. He sort of clenched his fists like this to see if it was for real. And he had cliffs to fence. He could hear the sound of his blood thumping in his ears. He could smell the smells of the hospital with a clarity that he hadn't experienced before. He felt the cold floor beneath his bare feet. He looked down. He was in a gown. He felt more alive than he'd ever felt in his life before. His senses were really heightened. And the pain was gone. He was pain-free. He couldn't believe it. But then he looked down and he saw this, what he thought was a wax image of himself lying on the bed. And he couldn't understand it. And he felt how cruel it was for somebody to put a Madame Tussauds type wax image of himself on the bed at a time when he was suffering so much. And he saw his wife leaning over this image, weeping. So he called out to her, tried to catch her attention, but she ignored him. And he shouted at her. And he said the spittle was coming out of his mouth. He shouted at her. And she didn't respond. He got really, really angry. And he was just screaming in her face. And she completely ignored him. And this is the confusion of the two-body dilemma. What people find when they've died is they are in a body, just like the body they were in when they died, looking down on their dead body. And that needs explaining. You see, there are two things we can do in science. We can be ignoramuses. We can be ignorant. The word ignorant comes from the verb to ignore. Ignorance is not lack of knowledge. It is the refusal to accept knowledge. Ignorance is when we turn our backs on the evidence. And I tell you, science is full of that. Science is full of ignorance. If ever there was an age of ignorance, it's the scientific age, the materialistic scientific age, because they will not accept evidence that contradicts their beliefs. No different to people in the past. The Catholics would not accept evidence that contradicted their beliefs, scientific evidence that Galileo presented to them. But it's no different now in reverse. Near-death experiences are providing evidence that's irrefutable. The thing is that with the advance of medical science, more and more people are being resuscitated until the numbers of resuscitated people are in the millions. And it's standard practice now to ask people who've been resuscitated if they've had any experience whilst they were in a coma, whilst they were out of it. And about 10% of people do report an experience. Mostly it's entering a world of light, a time of joy, meeting grandparents, meeting a being of light, going through a life review, and then being told that actually their time isn't up and it's time to return. And that's because they've been resuscitated. So how do we explain this two-body dilemma? Well, in my book Awaken, and in my physics, I explained that there are three major levels to the universe: the superphysical, the hyperphysical, and the physical. I explained that the physical level is based on the speed of light, the hyperphysical is based on twice the speed of light, and the superphysical is based on 16 times the speed of light. I had that knowledge from sources that wouldn't be acceptable to science. And the idea is that all speeds go from a 0 point to their maximum. So our world, our dimension, is formed out of energy in which the speed of the energy goes up to the speed of common light. And we are aware of everything in that reality. I'm just going to get up and get a prop for a moment, if you can bear with me. I'll just put my guitar there. It won't be a second. I can best express this situation with this box of matches. The idea is this, that we are little matchbox people. You see the little head? And we live in a matchbox. And that matchbox represents the physical world. It represents the world formed out of energy based on the speed of light. But the matchbox is part of the room. I'll just do a little spin around. There you go. This is the room. You can see the matchbox inside the room. Okay, there you go. No question about it, except I've got it upside down. And of course it's back to front. But it's a matchbox nonetheless. Now the thing about the little matchbox people inside the matchbox is they can't see any reality apart from the walls of their matchbox. And they assume that there is no room. You see, they don't know they're in a room. And this room is in a house, and the house is in the greater world. So the greater world outside represents the spiritual, the house represents the hyperphysical, the spiritual or the superphysical, the house represents the hyperphysical or the soul level. I call this the level of the soul. It's the anima mundi, the earth soul, of which we are a part, and then there's the physical. And what I'm working with, the explanation I have for this two-body dilemma, is that everything in the physical world is replicated in the hyperphysical. The hyperphysical is an exact replica. And so what's happening is, while you are growing a physical body in this world, you are growing a hyperphysical body in the hyperphysical world. And what I explain in my physics is that the separation between the physical world and the hyperphysical world and superphysical world is not space and time. It's the intrinsic speed of the energy. You see, the idea is that the energy can spin, particles of energy based on the speed of light can spin to form a vortex or undulate to form a wave, from light and matter. But in the hyperphysical, it's exactly the same. Energy based on twice the speed of light, particles of energy can spin to form vortices and undulate to form waves. So you can have hyperphysical matter and hyperphysical waves, and the same in the superphysical. So you can have a hyperphysical body just like the physical body. It has a butt you can sit on. Look, there's the butt. And the butt can sit on the chair. In the physical and the hyperphysical. Yes, you have hyperphysical houses and you have hyperphysical chairs. There's some books. There's a book which has been channeled through by someone who picked up messages from Lawrence of Arabia. And it's quite an extraordinary book. And he recounts his experiences after the motorbike accident. And when he finds himself, rescued, he did need rescuing. He was allocated a cottage in the hyperphysical world, in the world of the soul. So he's got his own little house there, his own little cottage. And it's just like a cottage in this world. And the world he's in, he describes, it's got trees, it's got gardens, and it's much bigger and it's much more beautiful and unspoiled than the world we're in. So this is explained because just as there are atoms and there's matter in the physical world, there are atoms there and there's matter in the hyperphysical world. So the idea is that the lesser is part of the greater. So 0 to the speed of light is the physical world, 0 to twice the speed of light is the hyperphysical, 0 to 3 times the speed of light is 16 times the speed of light is the superphysical. So it's a system of concentric spheres. This is the harmony of the spheres described by the ancients. Concentric sphere system. And the different levels of energy are the planes. These are the planes of Hermes, from which the word planet is derived. So we live on the innermost plane, the physical plane. But the separation between the worlds is not space and time, so they completely coincide in the same here and now. So this is the first cosmic law I put forward, that the separation between the worlds is not space and time, it's the speed of the energy. And this explains, as I explained in an earlier video, why angels are all around us, but we don't see them because they're moving too fast. So they can see us because our world is a part of their world. So this is the second law, cosmic law. It's the law of subsets, that the lesser world is part of the greater world. So the angels can see us, but we can't see the angels. If we go back to the matchbox analogy, the idea is I'm out here in the room. I'm like an angel, if you like. And I can move in and out of the matchbox. I can stick my finger in the matchbox, you see, so I can get into the matchbox, all right? Because that's part of my world. But the little match people, they can't come out of here, unless I pull them out, of course, because they're confined to their own little world by the constraints of the matchbox. So I can see them, but they don't see me, you see. Because my world, the room, is beyond their reality, but their reality is part of my reality. So the lesser is part of the greater. So we're embedded in a greater reality. We're embedded in these higher dimensions. Beings in the higher dimensions are aware of us, even if we're not aware of them. A very frustrating situation. But what happens is that in the near-death experiences, people pass over in a body. So what I'm saying is that the hyperphysical body is growing within and interpenetrating the physical body. And people experience this hyperphysical body as an aura. It's the etheric body. Experience the energy centers in this body as chakras. And it's almost as though this body is compressed, contained mostly within our body, but extends a little bit out. My father, who used to, measure the auric field, he was a healer. He was a medical doctor, but he was very much into these natural soul spiritual systems. And he said that the soul body extends out beyond the physical body. You can feel the energy of it. So I say that we've got two bodies. We've got a hyperphysical body growing alongside the physical body. So for every cell in the physical body, you've got a hyperphysical cell. For every atom in the physical body, you've got a hyperphysical atom. And they're growing in parallel to each other. And I say that there's a resonance between the physical and the hyperphysical through the DNA molecule. The hyperphysical DNA molecule overlaps the physical DNA molecule, and they're coils, just like the coil in your radio set, in your television set, and information passes from one to the other. And the differentiation of the physical body is driven by the hyperphysical. But it's also a feedback, because when people pass over in the near-death experience, what happens is that the physical body dies and the hyperphysical body simply breaks free, it separates out and goes into its own dimension, because the consciousness and the life force is in the hyperphysical body. So we're energy fields. This explains the field. Read Lynn McTaggart's book on the field. There's so many books out there on the energy field. The whole of alternative medicine is based on the belief in this energy field, that you can heal the physical body through the energy field, the hyperphysical body, stimulating healing in the physical. So we're not a body with a soul, and we're not a soul with a spirit. We're a spirit with a soul, and the soul with a body. So this physical body is the property of the hyperphysical, which is the property of the superphysical. So we're just here for a duration. We're here to have a physical experience. We're not physical beings here to have a spiritual experience, which so many people do, sitting on their bottoms meditating all day or going into a cave. No, we're not meant to do that. We're spiritual beings here to have a physical experience. We're intended to get into the world and to dig the garden and to do the work and to live a full physical life. That is the purpose of our being here, because we come from eternity. We come from greater dimensions. If we're meant to be spiritual, we're being spiritual out in the spiritual worlds. We're here to be physical, grounded. That's why I love nothing better than to get out, roll up my sleeves and dig in the garden, or build a tiny home with my nephew Bruce, get out the tools, and get physical. I love being physical. But the interesting thing in the near-death experiences is people meet their grandmothers. It's so common. They meet their grandparents when they pass over. And the point is the fact that they recognize their grandparents, that albeit the grandparents are older, not older, I got it wrong. The grandparents are a lot younger. Their bodies appear to be a lot younger. They meet their grandmothers. Now, that means that the form of the hyperphysical body is determined by the physical. And yet people also say that in their process of reincarnation, they tend to look pretty similar in their physical form. So there seems to be an interplay between the hyperphysical and the physical, but definitely each one, it's not just one way, each one has an influence on the other. And I believe just as the physical body determines the form of the hyperphysical to an extent, it also determines its fate. In other words, the way we choose to live in this world influences the evolution of our soul, which is what we're here for. So, to recap, the evidence of the near-death experiences suggests that we have a soul body as well as a physical body. I'm not saying that my theory is true. I'm not saying that I have managed to prove the existence of the soul or the soul body or anything like that with my physics. No, that is not it. The evidence is coming in from people's experiences, undeniable experiences. Read the book called Erasing Death. Written by a critical care specialist. Over 500 case studies at the time of publication of near-death experiences. He's a scientist. You know, the evidence is there. I am just endeavoring to explain the evidence. I'm trying to explain things that the most scientists ignore because of their religion, which is skepticism, their religion, which is materialism. These are religions. No different to communism, a religion, or Catholicism, a religion. These are just belief systems. They're just theoretical constructs. We have to take the evidence, and we can't ignore evidence. If we ignore evidence, we're unscientific. If you ignore equations like E equals mc squared, well, okay, physics may not be your perfect subject, but you can't ignore it and call yourself a scientist. So to recap, the evidence suggests that we grow a superphysical or soul body along with the physical body. And that when we pass over, when we shed this mortal frame, when we shed the physical body, the soul body goes off into its own dimension. But don't imagine the soul body is the soul. It's also called the soul fragment because it's just a fragment of the soul. There's a lot of evidence, scientific evidence. Professor Stevenson, Virginia University, has done a lot of research into reincarnation. There's a lot of evidence for reincarnation. And this suggests that the soul reincarnates again and again and again into different soul bodies. So you've got thousands of soul bodies, each soul body acting as a memory stick, a memory of a life experience. And they all belong to your soul. So you've been on this planet many times before in many different bodies, male and female. This is what the evidence is suggesting. So I leave you with that. I hope you've enjoyed this little tirade and little rave and little bit of music. But all I'm trying to do with my vortex physics is try to explain the mysteries, try to help us to understand that we're more than mortals, we're more than physical beings, that we are spiritual beings with souls, with soul bodies, having a physical experience on planet Earth. And I hope that your experience is a good one. I leave you with that. Thank you very much indeed.